Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. So today I'm going to do a super quick video just going over my basic reading stats from 2020. So to get this information, I've kind of used both Goodreads and the storygraph, which are the two kind of sites I use to store kind of what I'm reading and my challenges and things like that. I can have them both linked down below. They both generate very similar stats, but sometimes focusing on slightly different things. The storygraph in particular generates graphs and things all for you, and I can put pictures of those up on the screen as I'm speaking about them. So first of all, we'll go through the basic stats that Goodreads generates for you, because that's the ones that most people will be familiar with. So basic number, my Goodreads goal for last year was 75 books, which I met. And this translated to reading 23,836 pages. Goodreads tells you the shortest book you read, which for me was The Text, and this was 40 pages. And it also tells you the longest book that you read this year was Dark Bites by Sherilyn Kenyon, and this was 720 pages. And yeah, definitely the biggest book on my reading list for last year. Kind of a cheat though, as it was a compilation of short stories. Another point that Goodreads gives you is the average length of book that you read. For me, this was sitting at 317 pages for last year, which I think is fairly average for me. I think my normal reading lengths are normally between 300 and 400 pages. I think that's kind of a general novel size. I tend not to read these massive chunky books that a lot of people read, but also I'm not a big fan of novellas and short stories unless they're kind of characters from full-length books that I already have the background story on, because I just don't think short stories can really get in there with the amount of details you need to really care. Goodreads also tells you the most popular book that you read and the least popular book that you read. So I find it quite interesting that for both of these categories, the most popular and the least popular book that I read last year both fell into my worst books of 2020 video, which I find that quite surprising. So the most popular book that I read last year was The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, which I think I rated 2 stars. I enjoyed the premise of the book, but I just wasn't a fan of the execution. I just didn't find the story all that interesting. And the least popular book that I read was Dead Girl Walking by Roberta Gately, which, to be fair, that is a brand new release for the end of the year, so it's not really fair putting it as the least popular because it was probably partially due to the fact that it was a very new release. I myself read it as an ARC. But yeah, that one was in there, and that made it to my worst books of 2020 as well, which yeah, I'm surprised that for both of those categories they both featured in that video, but that's how it goes. And then the highest rated book on Goodreads was With the End in Mind by Catherine Mannix, and this one made it into my best books of 2020. So that one was clearly a favourite by quite a few people. The rated for that one was 4.54 on Goodreads, which is pretty damn high rating for a Goodreads sort of star rating. If you want to have a look at either of those videos, I will link them up in the card. So that's kind of the main things that Goodreads gives you at the end of your year. When it has a look back at your year in reading, that's the generalised kind of topics that they give you. Now, the other site that I use, the Storygraph, that I've mentioned a few times, it gives you a bit more in-depth stats for you to look through, which are really quite interesting. And like I say, it generates graphs and sort of figures for you to look at, so you can be a bit more visual with what you're looking at. So when you add in a TBR to the Storygraph and you add in books that you've read, it generates kind of what it thinks your preferences are. So for me, when I transferred my Goodreads TBR over to the Storygraph, which is something you can do, which is fantastic, it generated kind of a little summary of what it thought that I liked best. And that was that I typically chose fast-paced books between 300 and 499 pages, and there was like a certain few kind of moods that I liked as well, like mysterious and dark and things like that, which was highly accurate based on what I genuinely enjoy reading and rate the highest. So here's where I'll start popping the graphs on the screen that Storygraph has generated for each thing. So going for the pace of books between fast-paced, medium-paced and slow-paced, I'll pop the graph on the screen here showing that I definitely choose fast-paced books over the other two, which are fairly equal. But yeah, and I prefer books that kind of get to the point of it. I don't like these meandering, flowery books that take forever to get to the point. So that is definitely representative of what I like to read most, and it's probably not going to change a hell of a lot. I mean, I definitely have started to read more medium-paced ones, but I think slow pace will always probably be quite the lowest on the chart here. It also gives you a chart of your page numbers, so sort of the under 300 pages and the over 500 pages, and then the ones in the middle. And again, it's fairly obvious where my preferences lie, but also I think this is a sort of standard book size as well, so that does influence things. But yeah, I definitely kind of like to read a book that's a bit more manageable in size. All of the ones kind of on my bookshelves are definitely fitting into that kind of 300 to 400 kind of margins. If I was just to take off one here, you know, this one here that I just pulled off is actually slightly over it at 500, just over 500 pages. But yeah, yeah, if you see, those are a little bit smaller. So yeah, that's probably fairly accurate with what I've been reading. I definitely think I've read slightly smaller length novels this year. So maybe it's pulled down slightly, but it'll be interesting to see when I compare next year's stats if I'm still reading the same kind of length of book. Storygraph also gives you a breakdown between the fiction and non-fiction that you read, so I'll put the graph up here. So as you can see, I read about 70% fiction. I was expecting my non-fiction portion to be a little bit higher because I definitely read 1 or 2 non-fictions every month. But I suppose given the volume of books I do read overall, I can understand why fiction is definitely the strongest section in that chart. But yeah, I think I was surprised when I saw that figure that it wasn't slightly higher. But I'm getting more and more into non-fiction. So again, we'll see if that figure grows or if that's kind of where it stays. It's one of the fun things. I want to kind of do this video to compare for next year. So it'll be really interesting kind of to compare them overall. So it also does a breakdown of the moods that you prefer to read. And as you can see, the top moods for me are mysterious, emotional, and dark. And I think that kind of sums it up. You get your mysterious from a lot of your crime and your thrillers. Dark romances are definitely something that I really, really enjoy. And yeah, I like a bit of emotion in my books. I don't like things to be totally cold, and I like to really feel with the books. I want a book that makes me cry like a baby. So that definitely, I would agree with that. I would agree with that as well. It looks at genres as well. So sometimes I find books quite hard to put into genres. So obviously the Storygraph does that, you know, by itself. It must have like an algorithm to do it or something like that, or whatever the publishers have put their book down as. So it can be influenced by things that are maybe marketed wrongly or put into the wrong categories, things like that. But here's the general breakdown of the genres that I read last year. As you can see, the highest are the mystery and thrillers, the romance, and the contemporaries, which again, I'm surprised. I would not put contemporaries as one of my favourite genres, and yet it was in the top 3 of what I read last year. And then categories like science fiction and fantasy, which I would have said were proper favourites of mine, they're way down the list. So maybe this is why my reading year felt a little bit underwhelming. I think I'm straying away from what I actually truly enjoy. So again, I'm going to have to rectify this and see. I don't know, I don't often enjoy contemporary books that much, and they usually get a fairly average rating from me. So yeah, that was interesting. I think that could have something to do with my ratings. I want to definitely get back more into the sort of fantasy paranormal types that I used to read in the past, and for my shelves are full of. But as I'm planning to do a lot of rereads in 2021, I'm hopefully going to kind of realign with the tastes I actually really want to get back into. Storygraph breaks down the reviews and star ratings that you've given to books over the course of the year as well. Now, the Storygraph is better than Goodreads because you can give half stars. I think you can even give like 0.25 and 0.75 actually. There's such a big difference between a 3-star and a 4-star book. Having half-star options are really important, and I often am just adding them into my reviews in Goodreads, so it's really cool that the Storygraph actually allows you just to click on a half-star option. So yeah, here's a graph showing my my star ratings over 2020, and my average rating on Goodreads was 3.7, and my average rating on the Storygraph was 3.69. As you can see from the graph, 3 stars and 4 stars were actually my most commonly given ratings, which I think that's fair. I think most people would maybe say that. I do tend to give my books ratings between sort of 3 and 5 stars. I don't like rating books low, and I have to really dislike something to rate it lower than a 3-star. 3 stars, like if we're going to go through the star ratings for me, is 1 is I absolutely hated it, 2 is it's not to my taste, I didn't really enjoy it, 3 is decent read, could be average but decent read, 4 stars something I really, really enjoyed but just wasn't quite brilliant, and obviously 5 is just mind blown, my favorite kind of books, and obviously the half-star ratings are somewhere in between. So that's where I would probably say a 3-star would be an average book and a 3.5 would be a good, decent read for me, if that makes sense. So yeah, I was surprised, and in a few of my videos I've said that I was quite underwhelmed with my reading last year, but I was surprised at how many 4 stars I gave to books. Really quite funny. Obviously, some books you read and they stay with you and they really stick in your mind, and you might not rate them as highly as others, but you know, they stay with you. And then other books you'll rate really highly and then you forget about them. And I feel maybe the books that I really, really enjoyed and rated 4 stars, maybe they just weren't that impactful and I forgot about them. There were a few books that I looked back on reading over the course of the year, and I was like, oh, I didn't even remember reading that this year. I had to be reminded of it. Obviously the 3-star ratings were quite high, and I think for me 3 stars, like I say, is decent, but it's not anything outstanding. And obviously there was quite a lot of those as well. But yeah, no, I was surprised at looking at the way this has panned out, because I thought that they would be lower overall because I felt so underwhelmed with my reading this year. But no, obviously not. So maybe it was the case that I was pushing to read a certain number this year and not really taking the time to just enjoy the books I was really liking. Or maybe it was because I was pushing through books I didn't actually like. It could be any of these reasons. I've done a video on reading habits that I want to change in 2021. I'm going to link it up here. And then these are the things I'm wanting to change to try and make my reading year this year a little bit less underwhelming. So we'll see how it goes. It's only little things you can try and change. So that's a little speedy wrap up of my stats for 2020. I'm hoping to do stats videos every year, and obviously this year I've only got 1 year's data to work with. But yeah, it was kind of interesting to see kind of where my tastes were lying. There were a few things that surprised me and quite a lot that didn't surprise me at all. So it'll be interesting to see if anything changes for this year's reading. So I'll be definitely looking forward to the stats at the end of this year when it comes to that time of year. So that'll be where I leave you. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm a bit of a book nerd and do quite enjoy the odd stats video here and there. So hopefully you enjoyed this one, and I will see you again soon for another video. Bye!